He didn't know how long they sat there, but he recognized Megan's voice immediately. He's out there somewhere. I can feel him. I've always felt when he's around. I just hope he'll stop and talk to me so I can explain what we mean to each other. I have to make him believe me. The second interlocutor must have been Mary, but she spoke more softly and was a little harder to understand. I'm coming to believe that he doesn't want to be found, or at least doesn't want to talk to you. Look, we've been coming to this godforsaken piece of shitland for the last couple months, and we still haven't found him. These people aren't helping. Some of them are probably purposely keeping him aware of where we're looking so he can go somewhere else. I've never seen someone so good at hitchhiking to stay off the grid for so long. Hell, we drive these highways so often, we should have seen him hitchhiking. I know, but I need to find him and explain. I think he figured it out the day he got here and you let him catch us. I just don't think you prepared him well enough for it. I know. I should have broached the subject of polyamory earlier. I just thought he was sophisticated enough to accept it. It doesn't mean I love him any less, but I have to say it to his face. He won't answer emails or texts, and he certainly doesn't pick up the phone when I call. Mary snorted. Well, given that cell service here in God's country leaves a lot to be desired, it's not out of the question that he could have abandoned his phone. But that already sounds like a quest for the Holy Grail. If he doesn't want to be found, we can't keep traveling. Next trip, Mark will have to stay home and I'll have to work part-time to piss off my boss about how often I'm missing. I don't know how your employer gives you time off. I told her my husband is missing and I need to find him. She's been very patient with me, but I need to go back to your place and work for a couple weeks and then go looking for him again. Somehow I think he stayed here in the Sandhills. I don't know why. He's never mentioned this place in all the time we've been talking. He has no family here, and he certainly can't work without a car. Do you think he bought another car or a pickup and just left his truck in Hyannis to keep us guessing? Megan probably shrugged, but since Missouri couldn't see her and certainly wasn't going to stand there looking at her. I don't know, but I don't think so. He spent very little money since he left. There was nothing in the fuel receipts after the first few days. I wouldn't have even known he was in the area if it wasn't for the warning I gave to law enforcement. A state patrolman spoke with Kelly after he was spotted. He was working at that first ranch we checked. I think the rancher alerted Kelly that we were there because we sure didn't get any help from him. I can't imagine Kelly doing such a chore. He's an office worker who occasionally has to travel to look at properties all over the country. What could make him believe he could do what they do on the ranch? And to think they live so primitively. Outhouses and no internet, I couldn't do that. Missouri almost laughed, remembering his prejudice when he first came to Round Bar X. His first overall impression wasn't that far off from Mary's. He resigned himself to the fact that he had never sat in a public place and commented on his perceptions of how backward he thought the ranchers lived. Someone in the cafe must have been eavesdropping on Mary and wasn't prepared to help her or Megan find this Kelly free. Suddenly, he shook himself. He was so used to being a man named Missouri that he was beginning to see Kelly as a stranger, someone he had known in the past, but who now had nothing to do with him. Was he really losing his mind? As the women continued to talk, he pondered the difference between Kelly Free and Missouri. They were essentially the same person, but Missouri was a ranch worker with no ties to anyone, and Kelly Free was a married man with his own responsibilities. Both had their own standards of right and wrong, and Kelly was offended by the woman sitting in the next stall. Kelly needed to end his relationship with Megan, and Missouri didn't. He knew there had to be a reconciliation between his old self and his new self, but it wasn't going to happen today. He began to pay attention to the conversation behind him again. Mary, I'm going to check out the library again. They have internet access and Kelly will need to send some emails and get responses from his attorney. Since I know his passwords, I can access his email accounts and see if he's online. I may not find out where he is, but it will narrow it down. And maybe he'll just tell someone, his parents or his lawyer, where he is. One way or another, I'll track him through his own accounts. Missouri nearly pounded the table in frustration. Damn, he'd completely forgotten that Megan knew the passwords to his personal account and his Yahoo account. There was no need for secrecy in their lives until Megan decided to make a few partners. He would have to correct that mistake as soon as possible. He racked his brain, trying to remember if he and Lawrence had openly discussed their finances in an email or text message. Apparently not, but he'd have to check his history. Could Megan see if he'd checked old messages? The duo must have finished eating by now because they stood up and walked past Missouri, barely glancing at the man with the beard and mustache sitting in the next booth. Missouri leisurely finished his cup of coffee, as it was quite obvious that these two had no idea what he looked like or even thought about changing his routine. In fact, he shouldn't have been surprised, since he'd never worn a mustache or beard, and Megan had always treated them with disdain and stated that she wasn't attracted to them, much like the current fashion of celebrities and actors growing beards for a couple days. After leaving the tip, Missouri picked up his hat and headed to the cashier to pay the bill. He still had plenty of cash, as he had cashed most of the checks from Round Bar X, and Ronnie Bentley from Double B's had paid him in cash. He hid most of the cash in various pockets of his coat, pants, and even his trunk so it was accessible, but not all in one place. He went out and bought some hard candy. He had always read that the old cowboys liked hard candy when they hit the trail. He also bought a couple pints of good whiskey, for medicinal purposes only, of course. He carried the plastic bag back to camp. He must have been very quiet as he approached the camp because he startled the man who was going through his bags and belongings. Before he could think about it, a .45 caliber pistol was in his hand and pointed at the intruder. Hands up. The man froze in place and slowly rose to his feet. Turn around, asshole. I like to see who I'm shooting at. The man slowly turned around. It was Mark Brooks, and he had a very pale, almost green complexion. Missouri didn't give the appearance of knowing the man. Well, sonny boy, what the hell do you think you're doing? Mark managed to squeak out a comment. I'm looking for someone. Well, asshole, you won't find him in my bags. Empty your pockets. What? Look, asshole, I can shoot you right where you're standing. I bet no jury here would even leave the room to decide I was justified in shooting a common thief. You'll be dead, and hell, I can be gone long before they find your stupid, shitty body. Now empty your pockets so I can see you're not robbing me. Looking for someone isn't a good excuse to steal my stuff. Mark tried again. No, I'm really looking for someone. It's my best friend. My wife and his wife are in town right now looking for him, and I thought I'd see if he'd set up somewhere nearby. We tracked him down and we think he's around here somewhere. His name is Kelly Free, and we need to find him to take him home. I just wanted to see if anything in the owner's bags would identify him, since there was no one here when I got here. Please, you must believe me. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. I won't say it again. Turn out the pockets on this log, or I'll make a hole where you don't want it. He was in no hurry to obey, and Missouri put a cartridge between the chump's legs. He knew he could not fire another shot, as it would disturb the horses, and the first shot would attract someone's attention. Any subsequent shot would cause people to call the sheriff to investigate, but Mark probably wouldn't think twice about that. He seemed to almost lose control of his bowels from the first shot. Mark turned out his pockets with shaky hands. Missouri was thinking fast. He had to speak in a low and husky voice so Mark wouldn't recognize him. Apparently, his beard and mustache and wide-brimmed hat served as a good disguise. Seeing that Mark had nothing belonging to him, Missouri told him to gather his belongings and put them back in his pockets. Missouri then pushed Mark to the edge of the camp. As he did so, he tried to speak softly. Why don't you leave this man alone? Missouri put the .45 caliber pistol back in the holster on his waistband. Mark began to lower his hands. He's my friend, and he should be hurt. We want him home so he can heal. His wife wants to apologize and bring him back into her life. If nothing else, she just wants to talk to him face to face. She loves him, and he's been gone for months. Mark suddenly gazed intently into Missouri's face. His fright must have passed, and something seemed familiar to Missouri. What's your name, stranger? They call me Missouri. Now Mark's suspicions were aroused. Why do they call you Missouri? Well, everyone has to answer to something. Tex is too common a name, Oklahoma is too long, so is South Dakota. Iowa just sounds silly, Kansas isn't too popular in the beef state, and Nebraska would be a silly name here in Nebraska, and I don't bow Aksar Ben, which means Nebraska backwards. If I were in Missouri, I'd probably be called something else. But what's your legal name? The .45 came up again. You know, if you ask something like that, you might feel very bad, very bad. For all you know, I'm a fugitive felon. So why don't you learn a little lesson and go back where you came from before you find something you can't digest well? Mark's eyes went wide as the .45 still looked like a gun to him. He nodded and slowly backed away. Stumbling a couple times, he turned to see where he was going and was soon running for his life. He didn't look back. Missouri smiled crookedly. Yes, now they would know what to call him when searching for him. Mark was no fool. The disguise had worked for a little while. It wasn't really a disguise, but rather an easy way to come to terms with being away from civilization. Missouri immediately began setting up camp. Wherever Mark had parked, he had to get there quickly. Either the sheriff or Megan would be looking for him soon. His camp was among trees and brush, so he started downstream to use the brush and trees for his cover compared to the open area surrounding the town. If he could get over the hills, he could hide again, but since he didn't know how much time he had to just do it. Since he had camped many times before, it didn't take long, only about 10 minutes. The horses were ready to rest, and Missouri let them go a couple miles down the stream before getting out and starting to circle around Gordon. Cody was just east of Gordon, but he didn't think they'd have public Wi-Fi, and he needed to get in touch with Lawrence and find out if all the things he wanted to do were finished before he stopped to talk to Megan. She wasn't going to capitalize on this. It took a while to get over the various fences, but in that time he didn't see anyone official. The random pickups and cars that passed by as he crossed the highway didn't slow down or make any movements that would make him think they were interested in him. In fact, most of the locals just waved and moved on. By evening, he was again a few miles west and south of Gordon. He stopped at a farmhouse, and the owner allowed him to take the horses into the house, and he himself lay down in the barn. The owner, a single woman with a widowed mother living with her, invited him to dinner. He was surprised, but soon realized that they, like all ranchers, had been expecting him. Martha, the hostess, laughed when he asked her, "Missouri, everyone in the neighborhood is looking out for you. When those 3 idiots swooped into town, no one offered any news about the guy they were looking for. Yeah, we're not as stupid as they think we are. We know who you are, but we've also heard that you're hardworking, keep sober, nice to women, and a friend to anyone who needs one, and that's why you're one of us." They take a look and go home. The story goes that they come every other weekend or so and ask questions. Most of the ranches you drive through know you've been there, but no one bothers you. When you come into town, no one asks you questions. We all assume you have your reasons for being here and not talking to her, and that's good enough for us. Someday, perhaps you'll tell the real story, but I warn you that gossip is probably better. He smiled at her and continued to tell his story. He started with his old adage about bad things coming in threes and outlined it to her. After telling the whole story, she smiled back at him. You know, God works in a very mysterious way. You believe that 3 bad things have happened to you. First, you lost your job. But think about it. Your boss was an ass who kept trying to get you to live large and didn't appreciate you. Now you're free to do the same thing your way. And from what you're telling me, there are plenty of clients who would be happy to do it your way. She paused. The second unpleasantness was when you discovered that your wife was a whore and had no morals. Losing your job that day allowed you to find that out. How long would she have continued if you hadn't known? You say she had planned for that particular day, but was that really the case? Was she really just going to keep acting the way she was acting and hope for the best? No. This bad thing turned into a good thing. You got out of a horrible mess you got into through no fault of your own. Missouri hesitated and began to agree. He was healthier and more mature now than he had been when he worked for Jerry Myers. He thought his plans ahead, though now it seemed to him that he lived day to day, traveling on horseback. she continued. Third, your pickup broke down in Hyannis. Things probably couldn't have been better if you had planned for it. The whole thing with driving west out of Missouri, turning north into Nebraska, then turning around and heading for Sandhills. I believe God was sending you for healing. He wanted you to meet that rancher. He wanted you to calve and make hay. You needed a change, and he provided it. I think you do look different than you did a few months ago. You said yourself that your wife walked past you and didn't recognize you. Another idiot passing through your camp might think it was you, judging by your name. But since no one came out to him right away, he's either too afraid of the new you or doubts it's really you. She took a breath before continuing. You probably look older. Since you don't wear sunglasses, you have to squint against the sunlight. A few gray hairs have appeared in your beard. Your hair is now shoulder length, and I imagine that when you worked in the office, you were usually short-cropped and clean-shaven. Your hair even curls, and I'm willing to bet it wasn't long enough for that before. I'll also hazard a guess that sitting here with me is the most you've spoken in a while. Your voice gets rusty when you don't talk much. That guy, Mark, couldn't claim to have heard your voice specifically. Missouri chuckled. He did look very concerned when my gun ran out. She laughed. Oh my God, everyone's going to laugh about that. I know I'm not supposed to tell anyone about what you told me, but I'll have to do it the next time I'm in town. It will probably be tomorrow, since I have to go to church and do some work on my books. Missouri finally had something to smile about. This lady, at least 60 years old and very large, was cheerful and had a fine character. Her mother was still able to move around and help, but was more abrupt in her demeanor. It was hard to picture them as mother and daughter. Missouri stayed there for a few days before heading back to town. He camped again on the outskirts of town and went about his business. The first thing he did was go to the library where he connected to the Wi-Fi, created a new free email account, and contacted Lawrence Roberts. He then called Lawrence's office on his cell phone and soon gave his attorney the new email address so he could make sure all the emails from Missouri would not be sent to spam. Lawrence was able to assure Missouri that all of the money had been transferred out of the country and should not be accessible to Megan. However, he warned Missouri that the court could and would require an accounting of all funds and would then order Missouri to give up at least 50% in a final order. Missouri asked, "What happens if I never file for divorce?" Megan can wait and file for divorce, citing abandonment. There will still be an accounting of assets for distribution. But what happens if she can't find me to file? She'll still get a judgment from you. I can represent you in absentia, but most judges don't like that and will penalize you for not appearing. He paused for emphasis. Face it, Kelly. The courts are biased against the man in these cases. Up until the late 60s, too often the man in a marriage got the lion's share of the estate and his poor wife and children suffered. Now the courts are biased against the man and go out of their way to reward the woman. It is also assumed that the man earns more than the woman, which in your case was true until you lost your job. Her attorney will also try to make the case that you only allowed her a small fraction of what was hers under community property law. The court will probably agree and penalize you for abandoning her. Society rarely thinks about what you've been through, especially in the big cities where men seem to be humiliated at every turn. Missouri objected. Since I live here, is there any way to file a lawsuit here to have the local court hear my case against her? No, I'm sorry. Your marriage and most of your life together was made here in Missouri and should be heard by a local court and judge. If you could get her to establish residency wherever you are, then there's a chance you might get a better judgment. I think we'll leave it at that for now. I'm going to start moving again. I have plenty of room to travel and plenty of square miles to search for her. I'll be in touch again when I get a chance. In the meantime, we'll keep on keeping on. A few days later, Missouri went into town to the store and bought a pay-when-you-go phone so he wouldn't have to keep his regular phone turned off and without a battery in case Megan could track when he used the phone. Back at camp, he found that he had a pretty good signal and decided to call his ex-wife. He tried calling home first. He realized that it was still early and she might be at work. Digging around in his memory, he finally remembered her work number and dialed it. He was connected to the switchboard and then transferred to her extension. He was surprised. She must have been promoted since she had never had an extension before. She picked up on the second ring. Hello, this is Megan Free. How can I help you? I'm surprised you're still using my name. Why don't you use the name of your other family, the Brooks? Who's that? Is this some kind of prank? If so, I don't care to laugh. What? You don't recognize your own husband? Mark was puffing in your ear so hard you can't believe it's me? I'm surprised you're at work and not out partying with your friends. Did you get promoted to get a separate extension? Of course, she ignored all his comments after the first question. Is this really you, Kelly? This isn't some kind of prank? Why would someone call you and impersonate me? We're nobodies in the scheme of things. Every time we come to Nebraska, I leave cards with my numbers on them in case someone happens to see you. Most of the time, everyone who calls will let us down the trail, but sometimes someone calls and tries to tell me it's my Kelly. The first few times, I fell for the joke. God, I hate people like that. She must have checked her display. Hey, that's not Kelly's phone number. What's going on? I don't use my phone if you're trying to track me down. That's not why I called. I want you to stop looking for me. I don't want to see you, talk to you, hear about you, or have anything to do with you or your cronies. Leave me alone. File for divorce. The court will give you half of everything, and I'll have my lawyer arrange for it to be in your possession. Just forget you ever dated me, get your maiden name back, or take Brooks's last name as your own. But Kelly, honey, I love you and I miss you. Please come home or meet me somewhere so I can show you how I feel. Yes, you love me so much that you entertain our best friends and think I should be happy for the leftovers. Tell me, how long were you going to go behind my back? Please don't lie, because I came home early that day and you had no idea I was going to do it. I don't. I tried to introduce you to the concept of polyamory, but I was afraid of how you would take it. I guess I was right. You didn't take it very well. Holy shit, Sherlock. What could have put that thought in your head? Wait, it doesn't matter anymore. Your excuses don't mean anything. Just leave me the hell alone. There was silence for a few moments. Missouri was about to hang up when Megan spoke again. She was hard to understand as she must have started crying. I love you and I miss you. I want you back in my house and in my bed. Please don't hang up on me. Why do you want me back? I'm giving you $2,000 a month to help you with your expenses. You must have gotten a raise due to the promotion, so you don't need much of my money. You have 2 people who I assume will move into your house immediately and keep you warm at night. You don't need me, especially as I am now. No, you don't understand. I love Mary and Mark, but I love you. They will never replace you. We don't have the connection that you and I have. Mark and Mary, don't dream together like you and I did. I want and need that. Missouri snorted derisively. That's not going to happen. I don't dream about you, and what's more, I don't think about you for weeks, just wondering if and when we'll meet by chance. I'm still trying to decide if I'm just going to leave, beat the crap out of you and then walk away, or decide I need a little borderline justice. What do you mean by borderline justice? In the old days, an adulterous woman and her lover, or lovers in your case, could be killed and the court wouldn't care. If you listen to some of the gossip around here, the sense of frontier justice is shared by about 50%. The rest just think you're a fool and should stay in town where fools are treated more tolerantly. I guess I won't know how I'll react until the very moment we're face to face. So you're warned. Megan continued to cry. Some noise could be heard in the receiver, but Missouri couldn't make out what was being said to him. Megan closed the receiver, but he could hear her tell someone that she was okay and that she was just trying to talk to her husband. When she returned to talk to her estranged husband, she was talking to a dead cell phone. Missouri regretfully noted to himself that he hadn't been very polite, turned off the phone, and went to work to make himself a midday lunch. He thought about his remark about how little he thought of her now. It was true. He was more concerned with keeping his packs from wearing out on the pack horse. He was thinking about his next destination. He thought about the weather and how it might affect his journey. He thought about how to help the nearest rancher he came across. But he rarely thought about Megan and their marital failures, except for how she disrespected him and their vows, or occasionally tried to argue that they should reconcile. Increasingly, days or even weeks passed before he gave her any thought at all. Right now, he was a little angry that she was still trying to see him, but his anger was fading compared to the white-hot rage he had felt the day he had stumbled into the love nest. He was also no longer baffled and confused. Marriage no longer existed if his wife thought she could cheat with impunity and expect him to just accept it, and worse, join her. He wasn't some college-aged, hormone-driven boy looking for girls with no morals. No, he was an almost middle-aged man who intended to start a family with the love of his life. And she turned out to be just an overgrown sorority slut. In fact, his distancing himself from Megan and their marriage was doing just what he hoped it would. To be honest, he was quickly moving into a stage of indifference towards Megan. He was beginning to forget about her and her actions. Soon he would be able to just shrug at the memory of what she had done to him and their marriage, and maybe sigh at what could have been. Finishing his lunch, he told himself that he should file for divorce from her soon and take control away from the witch. She could use some delaying tactics, but not prevent the divorce. With that thought in mind, he logged onto the internet on his phone and sent the appropriate message using his new email account. Soon, it would be ready. The next morning, he broke camp fairly early and headed south again. He intended to stop at Circle Bar X and see Bill and Connie Blaze for a while. He was sure they would gladly welcome him back. The season was winding down and he wanted to find a more permanent place before the first frost made sleeping under the stars uncomfortable. He had traveled halfway to Hyannis in 4 days when he noticed smoke on the horizon. Damn, a forest fire could be very dangerous here. He set off to find the hearth of the fire and then tried to call for help. As he approached, the smoke dissipated, leading him to believe that the fire had died down and was not growing. Suddenly, as he crested a small hill, he saw exactly what was burning. There was a helicopter that had apparently made a hard landing in the meadow below and caught fire. The fire seemed to have gone out, and thankfully the green grass didn't catch fire. He wondered if there were any survivors among them. When he got closer, he saw someone moving near the wreckage. A lone woman was dragging something. When Missouri got close enough, he called out, "Hello, camp," as he didn't want to scare the survivor. The woman didn't look frightened. Moreover, she immediately raised her hand and waved at him. As he approached, she covered her eyes and looked at her savior. "I'm so glad to see someone. We went down yesterday, but figured someone would be looking for us until now." Missouri got off his horse and tossed the reins and a rope for reins. These were quarter horses, and they wouldn't budge unless they were badly spooked. "Are you the only survivor?" "No, my partner Jane was hurt. She's over there under the canopy. I think she broke a few vertebrae in her back on impact. The pilot is dead." Missouri assumed it was a medical helicopter. "Where were you headed?" "We were flying from North Platte to Valentine when we started having electrical problems. The pilot tried to land us, but the engine stalled and we were too close to the ground to safely descend the plane. After the collision, I got out of the airplane and went back for Jane, but I didn't get to Sam before the fire started. He was unconscious, so I don't think he was hurt much by the flames." Missouri nodded. "Why were you so far west if you were headed to Valentine?" He waved his hand toward the northeast. "It's over there, and you're not in a direct line between North Platte and Valentine." "Oh no, that can't be. No wonder they haven't found us yet. They'll be looking for us to the east. Sam said he didn't trust the GPS after the power surge, but it must have led him here. The radio went out during the power surge, and we didn't have time to use the satellite phone before we went down. Why not use it now? You should be able to get into the satellite." "It was in the bird when the fire started. I grabbed my survival gear and threw it to safety, then went to get Jane. It was too hot in the cabin by the time I freed her." Missouri nodded. By then, they were near a small shelter. He could hear the second woman moaning in pain. The first woman shrugged. I couldn't get to the medication either, so she's in a lot of pain. With her injuries, I can't move her anymore or she might have permanent spinal cord damage. She's a nurse and I'm an onboard paramedic. I've made her as comfortable as possible. Missouri looked around, then pulled out a pocket GPS unit. After studying it for a minute, he came up with a plan. Look, there's no cell service here either. I see there's a ranch about 10 miles south of here. Unless there are a lot of fences in between, I can get there in a couple hours and use their phone to call for help. I've programmed your location into the GPS, so help won't have to search long to find you. I will leave my pack horse here as it has food in it. There is also a small stove and a tent here if you need it. The paramedic nodded. I wish we could go with you, but we'd better stay close to the bird in case the emergency locator suddenly goes off before you get to help. Missouri quickly removed the packs from his pack horse and staked it out to get to some good grass. Then he climbed back into the saddle. Before setting off, he gave it a moment's thought. Since you'll probably be gone before I can get back here, just tell the others to leave my horse and packs here, and I'll come back and get them. She nodded. Good luck to you and your partner. I'll call for help as soon as I can get to the ranch. With those words, he did something he very rarely did. He never wore spurs, as there was no need to go fast, but now he kicked the horse's foot over the spurs and started at a gallop. It was too far for a spur race, but he and his horse would make it in time to escape. Stopping only to swing over a couple of fences, he picked up the pace. The horse rested while he pulled out the braces and lowered the wire so they could get across safely. He didn't bother to fasten the fence back up. The usual tension of the wire should have sufficed for the time being. Missouri, as he expected, galloped into the ranch yard a couple hours after leaving the crash site. Fortunately, the rancher was home, so he didn't have to search the house for a landline. After explaining his mission, the rancher called local authorities. It was about a 30-minute drive to the nearest fire station and ambulance, so the rancher and his handymen traveled by pickup truck and UTV to the scene. Extra blankets, food, water, and bandages were hastily thrown in. Armed with Missouri's GPS data, they were soon blazing on the horizon. Missouri didn't go with them, as he needed to take care of his horse. He took off his saddle and began rubbing the animal down. As he worked, he heard and saw several helicopters. One appeared to be a military helicopter and the other possibly a medical helicopter. Both were flying on a course that should have gotten them to the site without any problems. He assumed that the local sheriff's department had told the searchers where the helicopter had gone down. The paramedic, whose name Missouri realized he had never asked, and her partner Jane would soon be on their way to the hospital. After letting the horse rest, Missouri got in the saddle and set off to fetch the pack horse and the remaining supplies. Along the way, he replaced staples in a hedge. The fire department and the local ambulance were on the scene when he pulled up to the crash site. A large car was parked so as not to leave a trail that might interfere with the investigation, and a couple of smaller cars pulled up close. An ambulance was also parked away from the accident scene. Somehow it missed the return of the rancher and his crew, as it was the only civilian there when it reached the crash site. The sheriff and several deputies were present to guard the scene and keep gawkers and predators away. One of them told Missouri that the poor pilot could not be moved until the NTSB arrived on the scene. Missouri shook his head at the disrespect for the dead, but decided it was no longer his concern. He did what he could. He began to pack up his horse to continue his journey. Missouri had already packed up and was ready to leave when one of the men with a badge stopped and asked, "You know, in all the time you came out of nowhere, we never asked your name. Surely the investigators will want to know who you are." "I guess you're the guy named Missouri, am I right?" Missouri nodded. "You've probably heard my story. If it's possible, I'd like to stay just Missouri in the reports. I'm not quite ready to see my wife yet, so I need a few miles between here and where I'm headed. Could you also please not tell them which way I'm headed?" The sheriff nodded. None of the firefighters or medics were close enough to hear the conversation. Later, they would all just say they looked up, and Missouri had already disappeared behind the nearest hill. Of course, the sheriff was no fool. He knew Missouri's real name and gave it to the NTSB investigators, but didn't tell the reporters when they arrived on the scene. Missouri didn't realize it, but his travels were approaching legend status. Megan and Brooks continued to travel to the area regularly, but every person they talked to allegedly saw Missouri in different places, sometimes many miles away on the same day. He was credited with rescuing ranchers and travelers. All claimed to have heard from someone talking to someone who had spotted him and his horses. Sometimes he was seen wearing a brand new white hat, reminiscent of the Lone Ranger, sometimes a black hat. His horses were remarkably different. Some witnesses swore he rode a Palomino that was almost pure white. Others thought he rode a roan, maybe even a paint. Every case that was made against him gave him an almost mythical status. Girls and young women swore they had helped him in his time of need. Each of them smiled secretly when asked exactly what kind of help she had given him. Several of the ranchers where he stayed for days or weeks had daughters of suitable age, and they all claimed that Missouri was a true gentleman in every sense of the word. And his skill as a cowhand approached the legendary. Some communities said he even participated in local rodeos under an assumed name and always won the cowboy competitions of bronc riding, calf roping, harness roping, and bull wrestling. He was never a bull rider or bullfighter. No one has ever been able to explain the reason for this. His horses also had legendary status. Many cowboys claimed that they were allowed to ride Missouri horses in corral competitions, as well as in barrel racing and team roping events. One barrel racing contestant claimed that her horse went lame before the event, and Missouri demanded that she get on his horse, even though he had never competed in a barrel race before, and that she won that night. Missouri was just outside Circle Bar X when a state trooper stopped him for a chat. It was rather odd. He couldn't have been speeding on horseback and was riding parallel to the highway, but kept off the road. This was in case Megan and her lovers were nearby. As it was, the patrolman stopped at the gate and waited for Missouri to approach him. He noticed that Missouri was now carrying his .45 on his hip. "Son, could you light a cigarette for a couple minutes? I'd like to have a little chat with you if you don't mind." Missouri threw a leg over the pommel and horn and leaned back. "No, I guess not. I don't need to go anywhere anytime soon. Just heading down the road." "This isn't Bill Blaze's ranch, is it? They say he's a close friend of yours." "I wasn't so much a friend as a mentor and boss when I first came to Sandhills. Gosh, has it really only been 4 or 5 months? It seems like it's been much longer, but the days are getting shorter and the nights colder. I expect he'll need help all winter." "Oh, I don't think that will be a problem. The last time I spoke to him, he mentioned that I could meet you, and he asked me to tell you to let you know that the latch will be on standby anytime you return to the area." He paused. "Have you spoken to your wife? She still calls us occasionally to see how you're doing." "I talked to her on the phone once. I told her to file for divorce and get on with her life. I did just that. Why is she still bothering you?" "Well, it might have something to do with the stories that are going around." "What might those stories be?" That's when he found out about all his supposed worries. The patrolman grinningly told Missouri about all of his exploits that he could remember. Missouri was amazed and a little stunned. In this short time of one long summer, no man could have accomplished a fraction of what the patrolman was telling him about, and he was talking about it. The patrolman waved his hand. "Hell, we all know it, but a little mystery, a little romance because of the mystery, and a couple of real-life events, and things like that take on a life of their own." Missouri shook his head. "Sounds like those old novels about the Old West. I bet most of them are fictionalized stories featuring real people." "Yeah, you probably can't sell it now, but I know there are at least 3 people on Facebook and Snapchat who impersonate you and argue at length about which one is the real Missouri. The funny thing is, none of them give your real name. Either they don't know it, or they keep it quiet to prolong the mystery. Hell, all you need is a black mask and someone will start calling you the Lone Ranger. I'd need silver bullets too, I guess." Missouri touched his beard. "I guess I'd also need to be clean-shaven to be a good guy." They both laughed merrily. Soon the patrolman let Missouri go down the hills, and he returned to his patrol. After he told his fellow patrolman about his conversation with Missouri, his legend grew even more. A day later, he was back on the land of Circle Bar X. He had made a decision. He would see if Bill needed help for the winter. If so, he would light a light and position himself where he would be comfortable at night. As he practiced on the cows and steers he came across during his travels, his galloping skills improved. Although he didn't believe he could become a better shot, he already had some of the necessary skills. If Bill didn't want him back, there were a few others, like Ronnie Bentley on Double B, who would need a helper for the winter. When he entered the ranch yard, there was no shouting heard. He wasn't galloping at a high pace like in the old westerns, and he figured someone had seen him before he moved in, so he didn't think he could surprise anyone. And he was right. The Blazes and Butch were out of the house when he pulled up. "Hey, stranger, I'm sure you wouldn't mind a cup of coffee and a comfy chair after traveling through the hills." Missouri chuckled. "Yes, sir. That would be nice. May I let my horses out in your corral?" Bill grinned broadly. "Well, I don't know about that. Are you still the same Missouri that galloped out of here at the beginning of summer?" Connie lightly patted her husband on the head. "Missouri, don't stand for his jokes. 10,000 comedians out of work, and look what I got. Come in the house after you've taken care of your horses." Bill and Butch continued to giggle as they helped Missouri take the saddles and girths off the horses and gave them a quick wash and some grain after they got them into the corral. Then they helped drag all of Missouri's belongings into the bunkhouse, where Missouri was pleased to see that he still had the same room. Hoss moved out, but a new young assistant showed up. Butch began the introductions. "Missouri, this is Jesse. I call him Outlaw. He's still very wet, but we have hope." He turned to a very young man. "Outlaw, this is Missouri. Yes, a true legend." Young Jesse didn't have the tongue to meet a legend, so the handshake was tentative. Missouri only smiled at the young man. Butch later told him that Jesse claimed to be 18, but Bill believed the lad was actually a 16-year-old runaway. He was going to discuss his suspicions with the sheriff's department. Bill and Butch were going to maintain the illusion as to the outlaw's age until they got an answer from the sheriff. Connie invited the young man to have dinner at the ranch house every night. That evening, Connie invited Missouri and Butch to her house for dinner to celebrate the return of their friend. During dinner, Missouri told them the highlights of his journey, including an overheard conversation between his wife and her mistress at a cafe in Gordon. Bill and Butch laughed heartily at Missouri's account of his encounter with his former friend Mark. Young Jesse simply absorbed these stories with open mouth and wide-open eyes. Then, after a hearty meal, the others tried to outdo each other with legends of exploits, including a highly exaggerated story about a medical helicopter. Bill took the floor. "According to the latest version, which by the way is on the internet, you rode over the last hill at high speed, jumped off your horse at the last moment, and picked up Casey, a young paramedic, as she was fainting from relief that she had been rescued. Then you built a hut out of sod to protect her and her partner Jane from the terrible tornado that was coming at the site, and then galloped right into the teeth of the storm to save them. Somehow you made it several miles to the highway, climbed a cell tower, and hacked into the system to summon help. You used your high-powered flashlight to guide the helicopters to the scene, and then climbed down and led the others to the ground, where you carefully extracted the pilot from the wreckage and prayed for him." Missouri was shocked. Then he told them the true story. He didn't even know the name of the paramedic, and the pilot was still in the wreckage when he went back for his pack horse and supplies because the NTSB had radioed the order to the sheriff's department serving the area. The stories went on and on. Missouri and his multicolored horses were spotted throughout the vast Sandhills area from O'Neill in the east to Alliance in the west. The internet also gave information that they had been seen as far north as Murdo in South Dakota and as far south as McCook, Nebraska. Everyone cheerfully discussed the improbability of a man on horseback traveling over such a large area in a few months. Yes, it was possible, but so implausible that Missouri had little need for speed in his travels. Connie walked over and examined Missouri's face and scalp for injuries. When asked, she revealed that he was rumored to have fought repeatedly to protect poor defenseless women and girls in every town he happened to visit. Some of these reports came from alleged attackers, and in all cases, Missouri had handled his opponents, even the largest and most aggressive, with ease. It was a great night with old friends and a new friend. Outlaw relaxed, and like the others, began to tease Missouri a bit. Finally, Bill asked what Missouri had planned. Well, I was hoping you might need me for work this winter. I'm tired of nomadizing. If Megan shows up again, I'll sit and talk to her and let her know it's over between us. She can have the house and half my money if she doesn't fight for the divorce. If she wants to fight, I'll use my history to destroy her and her lovers. She has a choice. Bill and Connie nodded. Bill spoke first. Of course you have a job here at Circle Bar X. Everything is almost ready, except we need to move the hay bales to the ranch house to feed it this winter. We'll make quick work of that with you, and then we'll just keep an eye on the cows until we need to move them. Connie spoke next. We have gained some popularity through your travels. Somehow it became known that Round Bar X was your starting point, and it is now considered your home. We get a few visitors every week to see if you've returned. You have quite a fan club in these parts. If you don't mind, I'd like to ride the hedge whenever we get visitors. I can't even imagine what I could say to any of my fans, other than not to believe everything they hear. We've gotten several phone calls from that girl Casey and her friend Jane. They want to personally thank you for saving their lives. The emergency locator in the tail section didn't work and was damaged in the fire. Who knows how long it would have been before they were found? Bill paused. So you'll meet them if they show up? I don't know when Jane will be released from the hospital. From the news reports, her injuries were pretty extensive. Missouri nodded. Yes, I'll meet with them. When I arrived, that girl Casey had everything under control. She made Jane as comfortable as she could. She used my little tent to protect her and cooked them both food to last them until the cavalry came. By the time I got back, they had been airlifted out and were probably in a hospital in North Platte or Kearney. I don't actually know where they were taken. The firefighters and medics at the scene weren't sure. That dinner set the tone for Missouri's return to the ranch. He discovered that Bill had driven down to Hyannis and picked up Missouri's pickup truck. It had been stored in one of the machine sheds. Missouri had it mounted on a used horse trailer he bought locally. If he needed to travel again, he could take his faithful racehorses to new lands, including Wyoming or North Dakota. He stopped by the Alliance to change his clothes, as they had become badly worn during his travels. He used an old hat with a 3-inch brim and changed his beard to a goatee with a mustache. No one seemed to know who he was when he went into the various stores to store. That suited him just fine. True to his word, Bill sent Missouri out on horseback whenever strangers appeared on the ranch. One of the questions he asked each visitor was about their recent encounters with Missouri. They all chuckled at the fact that the supposed meetings continued, even though Missouri rarely left the ranch for weeks at a time. It was late fall. The days were still warm, but at night there was a distinct chill in the air, and the weather service warned of frost. The last bales had been moved from the hayfields to the small pastures where the cows and bulls would spend the winter. Fences were always on the list of things to do. Missouri would ride his horse to check fences and spend some time practicing tying posts. He was constantly improving. He still carried his .45 caliber pistol on his hip in case he came across an aggressive coyote or maybe an upset badger. In early November, the dreaded guests showed up. Megan arrived with the Brookses at Circle Bar X. For the first time since the search began, and the 10th time she had come to the ranch, she was invited into the house, and Missouri was sent for. The Brookses were emphatically told that they were not welcome and that they must remain in the car. At this, they rebelled, but Butch had a word or two with them, and they suddenly stopped being so belligerent. Butch told Bill later that he had just informed them that there was plenty of empty space for a couple of lonely graves, and it seemed to knock them out of their minds. True to his word, he brought each of them some water so they could refresh themselves while Megan met with her spurned husband. Connie introduced Megan to herself and Bill and asked her to sit at the dining room table with a glass of water. No attempt was made to strike up a conversation with her. In their opinion, Megan was an enemy of their employee and friend and had no need for polite conversation. Megan had to wait about 30 minutes before she heard footsteps coming from the kitchen area. The man who appeared in the doorway from the kitchen to the dining room was a stranger. He seemed taller than her husband. His hair was clearly longer than Kelly's. He squinted his eyes, as if he was used to looking at very sunlit expanses. He wore a black Western hat with an 8-inch brim that covered his eyes. The hat was pulled low on his forehead. This stranger also had a mustache and goatee, whereas her husband was always clean-shaven, even if he had to shave twice a day to keep his face smooth for his wife. The man barely nodded his head in acknowledgement of her presence. He set a glass of water on the table and sat across from her, leaning back in the sturdy dining room chair and crossing his legs. Well, Megan, you finally tracked me down. I want to let you know that I've decided not to avoid you anymore, so we can end this affair and move on with our lives. Megan answered nothing. She was still trying to reconcile this cowboy with her husband. His voice was familiar, but nothing else indicated it was Kelly, the man she had been married to for over 6 years. Finally, she held out her hand to Missouri. Is it really you, Kelly? He nodded. She looked around and saw Connie peeking out from around the corner. Are you trying to play a trick on me? Is this some kind of sick joke? I've been looking for my husband for months, and you're trying to get some ranch worker to impersonate Kelly Free. Do you take me for a fool? Where's my husband? Connie just shook her head and pointed at Missouri. This is the man who came to our ranch, broken and beaten. He gave us his name, but after that fateful day, he never spoke it again. This is Missouri, formerly known as Kelly Free. He has grown and matured more than when you knew him. He's learned and accepted the changes in his life. He's a better man than you deserve. And you need to sit down and talk and get your lives in order so he can heal and you can move on with your life. But that's a stranger. I know you don't like me, but how could you do this to me? How do you explain telling me Kelly is here and then bringing this guy? She broke down and started to cry. I need my husband. I need Kelly. Please bring him to me. I'm begging you to show me mercy. I've been looking for him for so long. Please, please, please. She rested her head on the table, wrapping her arms around her. Megan, listen to me. Oh, how can I tell? Is it me or is it me? Either way, I'm Kelly Free. I may not look like the man you knew, but I'm still your husband, at least for a while. You decided to start a new relationship with Mary and Mark Brooks, and you thought I would accept it and maybe even join them. I was so surprised, upset, and disappointed that I couldn't stay in Missouri any longer, so I drove here and got a job after my pickup truck broke down. I've been learning new things, traveling to find my way, and now I'm finally ready to meet you. Megan shook her head. This man, this stranger with facial hair, wearing a black hat, swarthy from being outside, looked like her Kelly. But this man seemed taller, more mature, stronger of character, with a body hardened by work. It couldn't be her Kelly, could it? She looked around. Connie Blaze came in, sat down next to her, and took her hand to comfort and encourage her. Kelly recounted several events that had happened between them before the affair. These events would not have been known to anyone else. Missouri took off his hat and placed it on the table. It was so hard to accept, but this man was her husband. He looked like a representative of the Old West. She looked to see if he had a 6-shot pistol on his hip. No, but there was a semi-automatic pistol there. Kelly noticed where she was looking. He carefully pulled the pistol from its holster and placed it on the table next to his hat. I'm sorry you don't feel safe right now. I carry this gun to shoot coyotes and sometimes rattlesnakes when I ride. Carrying it is so natural now that I ignore it and take it off when I don't need it. But why did you leave me? I love you, don't I? I left because it was obvious I wasn't enough for you. You broke the vows we made to each other in front of God, friends, and family. You took other lovers without discussing it with me. You have trampled on my heart, my feelings, and my desire to stay married to you. You showed the utmost disrespect to me in our marriage. I had to leave to deal with all of this. I finally came to terms with the way you treated me. but it was just Mary and Mark, our friends. We were just expanding our relationship with them. Sharing our bodies made us all closer. Maybe it felt that way to you. I felt betrayed, resentful, and sick in the head when I came home unexpectedly and found you all partying in my house, not to mention my bedroom. I had to leave before I did something humiliating or something that would cause great and lasting harm to you and your cronies. What do you mean by humiliate yourself? As I stood in the doorway watching, I couldn't decide if I should fall to the floor, curl up and cry my eyes out, or run to the bathroom to puke my guts out and then cry or just come in and beat you all up for what you did to me in our marriage. When you got out of bed and approached me, I was so disgusted that the only way not to push you away was to leave immediately, which I did. He paused to look at the expression on her face. She still seemed to be in denial that she had hurt him. He continued, I drove around the city for a few hours until I was out west. I finally decided that as long as I was moving, I didn't need to decide what to do with you. When I got stuck here in Hyannis, I had to accept the reality of what you did. At that point, our marriage was over. After that level of lies and disrespect, it's impossible to go back. I still wasn't ready to confront you, so I accepted a job at Circle Bar X. These people didn't have to accept me, but they did. They didn't have to offer hospitality to a stranger, but they did. I knew nothing about working on a ranch, but they accepted me, took care of me, and taught me how to work hard. And in all that time, they never once disrespected me or made fun of me about my personal life. Connie sat back and nodded in response to Missouri's words. They had done all this and more, which Missouri might never know. He had no idea how many times Bill and Butch had ended up just a few miles from where Missouri stopped to camp. They were always ready to give him help if he needed it. And they were proud of the fact that in all the months of traveling, he never needed them once. He had become the hero that Zane Grey, Louis L'Amour, and many others had written about. He became a man to ride the river with. He was welcomed wherever he went. He was one of them, a Sandhiller. He would stand tall wherever he went, across the country or into the city. She thought of his old boss. What was his name? Jerry or Terry or something? She was willing to bet his former boss wouldn't dare criticize Missouri now. Now he had the face, the confidence, and the backbone to look any opponent in the eye and back up his words with physical action if necessary. For some reason, Megan was still in denial about Kelly's presence after such a long separation. She sat back and shook her head. This couldn't be happening to her. All these months, she'd been feeding herself the illusion that Kelly was hurting, but he would throw himself into her arms again when they finally met. He loved her and needed her in his life. That was the illusion she had been building in her mind for months. It still seemed to her that Kelly would accept her lifestyle. All she needed to do was put Kelly to bed, and all would be well again. Kelly realized from the look on her face that she was still committed to the course she had started last spring in Missouri. He shook his head. He had no idea how to make her finally realize that her dreams were now a nightmare for him. There would be no reconciliation. He tried again. Megan, since you believe I'm Kelly, let's cut to the chase. When you get home, you're going to be served with divorce papers. Please just sign them and let the divorce take place. I've been generous. You need to read the papers to see if the agreement I proposed is fair. After that, you can openly build your life with Brooks. She shook her head in denial. No, I'm not accepting that. You just need to experience it. No, Megan, I won't. It's not going to happen. This lifestyle is not for me. You need to leave and not try to see me again. I'm coming to the judge's hearing. If you try to stop the divorce, I will call every news service I can find and tell them the whole story. Your parents and friends probably won't want to be around you anymore because they won't believe your shitty lifestyle. The Brooks will probably be embarrassed, and I think they'll dump you when things get a little rough. Just sign the papers, and you can live in your delusion for as long as you want. He stood up and walked away from the table. He finished speaking, though Megan was still trying to somehow justify her lifestyle and pull him into her sewer. As she spoke, she tried to stand up, but she was having a hard time doing so. He hadn't noticed it before since he was only looking at her face, but her stomach was bloated. So, looks like Mark had a pretty good swim. When are you due to give birth? Do your parents know who the father is, or are you lying to them? She gestured to her belly. It's your credit, Kelly. Part of the joy of the day you came home early was the anticipation of joy when we told you were going to be a dad. I was hoping that news would help you be part of the process, since Mark and Mary have already agreed to be godparents. He burst out laughing. Do you really expect me to believe this new pile of horse shit you're shoving down my throat? Do you really believe that the news of your pregnancy, possibly with my offspring, but more likely Mark, will make me so happy that I will immediately jump into your cesspool of shit? You're more delusional than I could ever imagine. Missouri turned toward the kitchen door. When your bastard child is born, we'll do a DNA test. If it turns out he's mine, I'll gladly pay child support, but I won't ask for visitation or custody. As far as I'm concerned, it's not my child and will never recognize me. He can call Mark Daddy. Then he walked out the kitchen door. Megan rushed to stop him, but in time to see this man, her husband, almost a stranger, grabbed the reins and mane, jumped on his horse, and galloped out of the ranch yard at a good pace. Missouri didn't bother to look back at her tear-drenched face. Megan finally realized what she'd done. Ever since she'd discovered the pleasures of polyamory, her life had gotten worse, not better. All her plans had been in vain. She didn't have a husband. Her job was pretty shaky since she had taken so long to find one. Megan slowly crept back into the dining room where Connie was still sitting. She looked at the rancher's wife. He really is the father of my baby. Mark had a vasectomy years ago when he and Mary decided not to have children. We haven't had anyone else since we became exclusive. Connie couldn't resist. I think you've forgotten what exclusive means. Megan collapsed into her chair. I know. I really thought it would be good for us. 4 people loving each other wholeheartedly, without jealousy and in perfect harmony with each other. Everything I read online about it said it was a new way, a better way. Statistics say that there is less cheating in polymarriages and that most people are very happy in such relationships. Connie shook her head. Haven't you ever heard that you can't believe everything you find on the internet? Even us poor country bumpkins know that. Most cultures gave up on multiple wives or husbands years ago because it wasn't viable in the long run. I believe it is very rare that such relationships work and are not the norm. Trying to live with one person is hard enough, and trying to please multiple people is almost impossible. Megan began to cry quietly. She finally managed to pull herself together and looked up at her hostess. Tell Kelly I'm going home, but I'm going to fight for the divorce. His child needs a mother as well as a father, and that's the only reason I'm going to fight. She stood up and joined her lovers, and soon they were out of sight. The dust had not yet settled when Missouri returned to the ranch house. Connie told him about what Megan had said. He had only nodded. He hoped she would just get over it, but deep down he knew she wasn't going to go quietly. Life went on. Kelly returned to her hometown in Missouri for the divorce hearing. Lawrence filed all the necessary motions. Megan responded as promised. She admitted wrongdoing, but told the judge she had come to her senses and ended her relationship with Brooks. They remained friends, but no longer lovers. She asked for counseling. The judge took all of this into consideration and scheduled another court hearing in 2 weeks. During the wait, Kelly stayed with his parents. They were amazed at how much he had changed. They were also happy about the change, but were very disappointed by Megan's outrageous behavior. They truly loved her as a daughter, but for what she had done to their son, she was persona non grata. During the waiting period, Megan went into labor and gave birth to a beautiful baby girl whom she immediately named Kelly. DNA testing revealed that she is a descendant of Kelly Free. Kelly's parents forgave Megan a little so that they could bond with their granddaughter. Kelly visited the hospital before Kelly was released to go home. He didn't want to admit it, but she had touched his heartstrings. If only Megan hadn't decided to entertain Brooks, they would have been so happy to have little Kelly in their lives. Now, he would be a part-time father. Megan took little Kelly to Fry almost daily to visit her grandparents. Kelly tried to avoid these visits. He always left immediately after Megan arrived. At the next hearing, the judge announced his decision. After reviewing all of the evidence, as well as the briefs, I have decided that spousal counseling would not be beneficial. Mr. Free, who I hear is also named Missouri, it appears that you have made a new life for yourself in Nebraska. I have read your official report and have also read other people's statements about you. If all this is true, you have abandoned Mrs. Free. He further ordered that 50% of the assets be turned over to Megan by the end of next week. He also ordered alimony for Kelly's support. There would be no alimony, better known as child support, since Kelly officially earned less than Megan. He also scheduled visits as usual every Wednesday, every weekend, and 6 weeks in the summer, even though Kelly had not asked for visits. He advised Megan to make sure that Kelly also had access to his daughter on at least half of the usual holidays each year. If Mr. Free comes back to this court complaining that you have not complied with my order and have made it difficult for him to have visits with his daughter, I will not be satisfied and will reconsider custody. I am tired of the bickering of so-called adults who use children as weapons. Do you understand me? Megan stood up and acknowledged the order. Your Honor, I would prefer that the divorce not take place and that my husband come home to me and my daughter. Since he is the one requesting the dissolution of our marriage, I will in no way deny him visitation, just in case he forgives me and wants to be a family again. Kelly made no comment to the judge. With the gavel ringing, the decision was made. Kelly and Megan were no longer married. He made sure that all of his assets, including the ones his lawyer had stashed away for him, were divided equally so that little Kelly would have no wants while her mother took care of the finances. The next day, Kelly left for Nebraska. His return, however, was anything but ordinary. While he was at his parents' house, he contacted some of his old clients. Most of them were very happy to hear from him and were willing to use his services to find new real estate. Now Missouri was in business for himself, but with a few twists. On his horse, which he named Leroy, a gelding named after the horse from the big and rich song Save a Horse Ride a Cowboy, he would travel to the places the companies wanted. He would spend a couple of weeks just traveling around the neighborhoods, even if they were in a densely populated area. He found that not only did he attract a lot of attention, but that the residents liked to talk to a man on horseback. In between trips, he worked on the ranch again. He enjoyed the manual labor. It gave him time to think and plan while his hands were busy. In the winter, when daily chores other than feeding the cattle became less pressing, he was able to communicate with his family via the internet. He helped Bill install a cell phone booster, so video calling became even more convenient. He was getting to know his daughter better and better, as she was at his parents' house almost every time he called. The locals were already buzzing about strangers coming to Hyannis looking for a legend named Missouri. Not a few minutes later, an SUV from out of state showed up outside Circle Bar X. At least its passengers didn't get out of the car with their noses up their asses and talk condescendingly to the Blazes when they introduced themselves. The man and woman were agents for a cable network specializing in movies about cheating spouses, and the internet hype about Missouri had piqued their interest. By the time they left, a promise had been made to keep Missouri anonymous by changing names, dates, and locations enough so that only those really in the know would know who the story was about. The working title is The Missouri Man, but Missouri's hometown will be changed. Missouri also had the agents contact Megan to get her opinion and approval, although this wasn't really necessary since the story was fictional. Butch was assigned as the liaison to Tinseltown. Missouri learned that this quiet man had a degree in communications and had lawyer friends. Along with Butch and Lawrence Roberts, Missouri soon had a public relations specialist and an entertainment lawyer. Very quickly, a corporation was formed, and Missouri became the CEO, with Bill and Connie on the board of directors and all Circle Bar ex-employees becoming shareholders. The next change came when Megan contacted Missouri about a job. Kelly, I need you to be more than just a face on the screen for your daughter. After I was contacted by the movie people, I realized I didn't want to live here in Missouri anymore. Your parents and I have talked. We'd all like to move. Is there anywhere near the ranch that we could move to so we could see you more often? I need something to do. Maybe there's some work nearby? Kelly was almost stunned. He hadn't expected a new twist in his life, and this wasn't a bad one. Actually, Megan, I need someone to help Butch with this movie. I think you're just the man to help. Let me call you back. He finished talking to Megan and called his parents to confirm the news. Ideas were kicked around, some discarded, but others thoughtfully expanded upon until a workable plan emerged. Kelly then went to the village council in Hyannis and presented his idea to build some very nice homes there on the outskirts of town. Someone from a larger community might have wondered why the village would need a few extra houses since the infrastructure could usually handle such an increase. But in the village, new houses were a strain on a small system and had to be carefully considered. Fortunately, the village was able to handle the increase and the new construction was approved. Megan immediately set about moving in. Kelly found a small but livable mobile home for her. Soon she and Kelly were settling into their new place. Baby Kelly was soon called Miss Missouri in honor of her father. One of the writers of the movie also drove the RV and parked at the campground, and the movie was immediately expanded to include these new events. The Man from Missouri was soon divided into several parts. The first part is the original story of betrayal and healing. The second part would be about divorce and redemption. The screenwriter was going to use creative freedom to get the couple back together. This part could end up on another cable channel specializing in love stories. The screenwriter was also thinking about how to include some legendary events attributed to Missouri in between the first and second installments to keep things interesting. Some advocated for an episodic series rather than just a couple movies. What about Missouri's personal life, you ask? No, it was over between him and Megan. They became friends and also became Miss Missouri's parents, but that's about it. But Missouri was not destined to be alone. While the high-end modular homes were being planned, built, and then brought to Sandhills from Megan and Missouri's parents, there was someone new in the ranch yard. One day, a van pulled up to them. Missouri was just inside the cabin when a passenger got out. A pretty woman who moved with the aid of crutches introduced herself as Jane Gentry and came to thank her rescuer. Her driver was a handsome Casey, a paramedic from the helicopter. Usually, Missouri tried to avoid his suitors, but this time he decided to sit and talk to the two women. Jane was telling Bill and Connie about what kind of man Missouri was. Casey kept repeating the same thing. Bill and Connie agreed with the women and smirked as they looked at Missouri's discomfort. Finally, Connie asked about Jane's injuries. The blow broke several vertebrae in my spine, so it took me a long time to get back on my feet. I spent several months in a wheelchair while I went through physical therapy. I am slowly getting better and hope to be crutch-free soon. In the meantime, I have obtained my advanced practice nursing license. I can no longer fly, and so I am looking for a place to open a clinic. Do you think Hyannis could use some medical attention? Casey added. I'm working on my nursing license and I want to help Jane. I have PTSD from the accident and I'm working in a ground ambulance while I get my license. This first meeting set the stage for additional meetings to refine plans. A survey needed to be done about whether additional medical care was needed in the small community. A building needed to be found or constructed to house the clinic. Over the next few months, Missouri was so busy helping out at the ranch, moving his parents around, getting to know his daughter, trying to contain the outrageous stories proposed for the movie, planning the clinic, and even making several trips to see clients that he was stumping himself. Jane intervened and forced Missouri to take a break. Her condition improved to the point where she no longer needed crutches, but she still couldn't stand for long periods of time. As she recovered, their meetings went from business to more personal. She was a good-looking 35-year-old who'd been burned by a failed lover in college, and she'd stayed away from men ever since. Yes, she and Casey had had a close physical relationship, but it had ended some time ago, and now they were best friends, almost sisters. Casey had problems with men too, which was why she had stayed away from the male gender before the accident. Missouri, who had suddenly appeared at the crash site, taken command, quickly assessed the situation, and then performed their rescue, was her hero, and she idolized him. They both half-heartedly tuned into him. They had long conversations about him. Jane was the first to move from hero worship to appreciating him as a man, a friend, a confidant, and possibly a lover. Casey had the good sense to warn her friend that she had better never hurt the man or hell would descend on Jane, not unlike the notoriety that had fallen on Megan's head. Jane convinced Missouri that it was time to get away for a while. It was now the beginning of summer again. The frosts were off the ground and the hills were green and lush. The branding was over, and there were still a few weeks before the haymaking began. This time, she invited herself as a caregiver. She hadn't ridden much in her life, so she got a quick riding lesson. Missouri hadn't wanted to take her along, but after everyone, including Megan and his parents, told him that the days of traveling alone were over, he decided a companion wouldn't hurt. During that week of just riding and relaxing without leaving Circle Bar X, their phones were turned off, and they became more than just friends or caregiver and receiver. They became close to each other and were engaged when they returned. When the couple left for a week, Megan realized that she would now completely disappear from Missouri's life, except for her role as a co-worker and co-parent. That's when she gave up and began to see Butch as her next and hopefully last love. Over time, Missouri was joined by two half-brothers from her father, the legendary Missouri Man and Jane, and two half-sisters from her mother and Butch. She was a wonderful and very well-developed big sister and friend to all. Bill and Connie were like grandparents to the clan. The end. If you haven't watched the first part of this video, the link will be in the description. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, so subscribe to my channel and watch the next video.